So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our third webinar in our Life After Stroke series. Apologies, I realise that some of you have had some technical difficulty with the videos, but now we are live and that should be resolved. So, hang on with us. So I want to say from the beginning that I am so grateful that we are focusing on this topic, which is really important, about caring for the caregiver, an area that has really been overlooked so far. And it's really important that we recognise that our caregivers do an awful lot behind the scenes to support stroke survivors. But of course, this has effects on them. So I really hope you enjoy the session today. And I want to thank in advance our chair and our speakers. And I want to thank our sponsors. We're just going to flash them up on the screen there because without them, we would not be able to bring this event to you. And we certainly wouldn't be able to bring it to you free. I'd also like to thank the members of the scientific committee who have given a lot of time to help us in designing our programme. And of course, I'd like to thank SAFE, who behind the scenes have done an awful lot of the organisation. So we're going to start. Can I encourage you to be a really active audience? And can I ask you, please, if you're on Twitter, the hashtag for this event is hashtag life after stroke, all one word. And please tell us what you think. And please tell us about your experiences. And please submit questions and please put comments on. So if you want to put any comments or ask a question during the live stream, you can simply open a browser tab or on your phone, go to www.slido.com, and that's below me at the moment. And then you put in the code below, and then you can participate in the poll and you can submit your questions. So please do that. And we will endeavour today to come back and answer as many of your questions and address your comments. We would also like you to participate in our polls. And the first poll is being put up just at the moment. And the poll question is, what are the main issues around around caring for a stroke carer? So what are the main issues around caring for a stroke survivor? And please respond to the poll and we will bring you the results back. So enough of me. I'm delighted to pass you on to the session this morning. And first up is our wonderful chair. And our chair is Harriet Provost. I hope I've said the name right, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But Harriet is, and she is our SAFE president, but she's also the Professor of Neurocognitive Disorders and Rehabilitation at the University of Macedonia in Greece. So I'm going to pass over to Harriet now, and please enjoy the session and please interact with us. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Averill, for organizing the European Life After Stroke webinar series. You've really been the force behind all this effort, and on behalf of SAFE, I am honored and thrilled to be chairing this important session today. Firstly, we will be hearing from Professor Carlos Semenza, who will talk about stroke survivors' experiences and how they pose problems for informer carers and can generate conflict. He's going to look at what can be done to rectify these differences. Some practical tips that might enhance stroke survivors, clinicians, and carers' communication. Professor Semenza's presentation will be followed by Carla Pereira, who will talk about the impact of informal caregiving on stroke and how carers adapt to life after stroke and what role the health professional can play in supporting this transition. Jana Dobrowska, the director of stroke support organizations in Cerebrum in the Czech Republic, will then give the final presentation of the morning. Jana will talk about a service that Cerebrum has developed and delivered for carers and how it improved their health and well-being. You can post questions, like Averill said, during the morning on the question facility. This can be done anonymously if you want to withhold your name, for example. And as Averill mentioned, please post your questions in Q&A in the Q&A function on Slido. You see it again under my face here. Please do that. At the end of all presentations, we'll ask our speakers to answer your questions. We're going to collect them from the three sessions, and we're going to ask them at the end this morning. So without further ado, I would like to now introduce Professor Carlo Semenza, Professor Emeritus, formerly Professor of Psychobiology and Neuropsychology at the University of Padua in Italy. And he's a registered psychotherapist and psychologist. It has been an honor and privilege to collaborate with Carlo in the past, and we are thrilled that he has accepted our invitation to give today's opening lecture. Carlo, off to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Harriet, for the introduction. And I'm really honored and pleased to share with you today some thoughts about the caregiver-patient relation, a topic I've been thinking about for the past 30 years. So it's in a quarter of an hour or so. I'm not telling you everything, and I will instead trying to focus on one single topic. Can I share the screen now?
Please do.
Yes. Okay, so carers, as we have been told, may find themselves in conflict with stroke survivors for several reasons. One particular reason, which I will focus in today, is the discrepancy between what caregivers feel the stroke survivors' cognitive problems are, and on the other side, the stroke survivors' own perception and awareness of their deficit and its severity. This discrepancy may generate, especially in the long run, several problems that will negatively interfere with the outcome of rehabilitation and ultimately with each interested party's well-being and quality of life. Caregivers should be made aware of the multiple causes of conflicts of this kind. So it's a complex problem, and generally not enough is done to help caregivers in understanding the problem. A mismatch in the evaluation of stroke survivors' problems may stem with very negative consequences from both the stroke survivors' cognitive deficits and the caregivers' expectations. Caregivers should know that lack of awareness of the cognitive deficit is a very, very common consequence of brain damage, which is intuitive, but the terms of this lack of awareness are not known, and they are better known to the caregivers. That is my main claim here. The cause may be related to either the premorbid personality of the patient and the type of brain lesion. The first one is the intuitive factor, the intuitive cause, and caregivers may be thinking only about that. But there are some peculiarities of the results of brain lesion that need to be known, and confounding the two factors may lead to very, very serious problems. Surely, the premorbid personality of the person with stroke has an influence. There is somebody who has always been over-optimistic, and she may remain such even after stroke. So denying basically problem, being excited, and totally unaware of the problems. On the other hand, people who were depressed before would be even more depressed now. And in either case, uh, that would influence a lot the self-evaluation. Attributing unawareness to premorbid personality or to changes of it alone may be a serious mistake. Mind you, it's a mistake that is very easy to commit. That's all caregivers know. Caregivers, in most cases, have known the patient for a long time and feel that they can rely on that knowledge. Okay, so that's all they have. And they know the personality of the patient, and they may think that everything derives from that. Actually, they may be absolutely right. There's no doubt about that. However, there are additional problems that caregivers may not know and generally don't. What caregivers do not know, because they haven't had any formal training in neuropsychology, is that certain types of lesions, of brain lesions, are especially likely to lead to an awareness deficit. So, stroke survivors, for example, with the right posterior lesions, may ignore space, even their own body parts. They may believe that body parts are owned, their own body parts are owned by other people. They have a paralyzed left limb, and they may say, look, this limb is yours, doctor, it's not mine. So this is a delusion, but sometimes it comes in a much subtle way, and you need to understand that it can happen. Left or posterior lesions with aphasia may not realize, patients with left lesion with aphasia may not realize they have comprehension and production problems. So they first do not realize that they do not get the other people's message. And also, they do not realize that their message doesn't reach the interlocutor. So they may get very upset, and in so doing, they get in trouble with the relation with the patient. Another source of endless problems can happen after frontal lobe lesions. People is inattentive and may be unaware, for instance, of violating social rules. So they may be disinhibited, they may behave improperly, and without realizing that they are improper and they, in fact, are making trouble socially. All this is not known to the large majority of caregivers who might have an intuition, but I think caregivers may be helped by being told and explained and given the opportunity to discuss these problems. Caregivers should be made aware of the fact that lack of awareness of cognitive deficit is a very common consequence of brain damage. They should also know that awareness deficit may be subtle and therefore harder to spot, while sometimes, on the contrary, it may manifest itself as conspicuous, harder to win delusion. So there is no way, in some cases, to convince the patient that their behavior is wrong, is problematic. One interesting thing is that stroke survivors may either overestimate their abilities, which is common, but sometimes, much more importantly, as much as important, underestimate them because of authentic cognitive deficit or depression. Moreover, it has been also shown that stroke survivors, magnifying what happens in the elderly, may overestimate their premorbid performance, thus being unhappy with a perfectly good performance. For instance, an old man would say, when I was young, I could repeat 15 words in a row, which is almost impossible. Very few people in the world can do that. The average performance is 7 plus or minus 2, but still the elderly or patients may be unhappy about a perfectly normal performance. Caregivers may want to know that the pattern of spared and affected abilities may be sometimes counterintuitive. For instance, and we dealt with that a bit in a paper with Harriet, stroke survivors may overestimate their math abilities. They may think they can do calculation easily, while they are not. On the same time, they may still be able, while being affected in math, to make very sensible financial choices. So it is a sort of counterintuitive that you can do sensible financial choices, but you don't know math. But that can perfectly happen. And the caregiver should be told, should be made aware that may happen. Caregivers too may overestimate or underestimate the stroke survivor's ability, and this may lead to problems. For instance, it's a commonplace, a common observation, at least for me, who worked on aphasia for about 50 years, that especially in early times, caregivers and the family at large may minimize the impact of aphasia. They say the patient lets her himself perfectly understood, while it is not. And he understands everything, she understands everything. It may not be the case. And that may generate problem. Also, one other thing that can happen on the other side is that is denying the patient's ability that may be perfectly spared to take important decisions. So the patient is not given the opportunity to take decision that he is perfectly able to take, and that, of course, may upset the patient and the caregiver-patient relation. Caregivers should be made aware of these problems and provided with tools to help them. These tools may be the results of questionnaires given to both the stroke survivors and the caregivers, emphasizing the discrepancy. So, caregivers may also benefit from knowing what objective measures of stroke survivors' cognitive functions reveal, which may be different from the caregiver's intuition. So be aware that all these things can be shared with the caregivers. Ultimately, caregivers should be told that the discrepancy between objective results and their intuition is very common. There is nothing to worry about that. They should not worry, and especially they should not feel guilty about this fact. And as you know for sure, caregivers are very prone to feel guilty. And that is one of the things you can and should get rid of if you wanted to help them. So help them not to feel guilty. It is just important information they may consider what you give them. But what you should realize, and the caregiver should realize, that ultimately, since they are in the position to be with the patient all the time, their judgment is the ultimate appeal. They may rely on their own judgment. So if you're doing your best, you're doing enough. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes, we heard you. We heard everything that you said, Carlo. Thank you so much for your
That's
presentation this
great.
morning. And if you could bear with us, we're going to go on to the next speaker, but I know that there are some questions coming in. So we will try and see if we can sort Harriet out in the meantime. But we're going to go on to our next speaker this morning. So our next speaker this morning is actually Carla.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. I would like to start by congratulating the organization HandSafe for providing the opportunity to discuss and to bring to the debate such an important topic and discussing these struggles from the caregivers' perspectives. And my presentation will be exactly about the impact of stroke in the caregivers' lives. So if I could share my PowerPoint. Can you see now? Yes, I hope so. As I said, stroke is still one of the most common causes of complex disability in worldwide and particularly in Europe. And the recovery and its impact affects not only the person with stroke, but also the family. And it actually affects usually families more broadly than other chronic diseases. We also know that these may result in transformations of roles, responsibilities, and relationships within families, but research tend to explore or the experience of people with stroke or the perspective and experience of caregivers and family, doing it separately. But we know that it's not what happened in real life, and the experience of stroke should not be seen as an individual phenomena, and that it was what inspired my work and particularly my PhD, and what we aimed to do was to explore their experiences together, combined. So the aim of the study that I bring here today was to understand how Portuguese informal caregivers and their relatives who suffered a stroke experience this adaptation after and transition to home, and how health professionals may support their transition and adaptation to a new life situation. And to achieve these goals, I carried out interviews to both carers, people with stroke, and health professionals, and I did it 1 month after discharge from the hospital or from the rehabilitation units, and then 6 months later in order to follow up this experience of transition to home. During this process, there was involved a total of 24 participants, including 8 people with stroke that were all living at home at the moment of the interviews and had different levels of severity provoked by stroke. There were also involved 10 carers, 8 being the partner of the person with stroke, and 2 adult child, and also 6 health professionals, including 4 physiotherapists, 1 speech and language therapist, and 1 occupational therapist. So, analyzing data from the interviews 1 and 6 months after discharge, we realized that we had 3 main themes reported by the participants. The first one was related with the importance of being optimistic about their new situation, about what happened, and how they dealt with the daily challenges. And another important theme was balancing the supports they had, including mutual supports between the person who suffered the stroke and the carer, as well as other sources of support, such as from other family members or health professionals or a few friends. A third theme that came from the interviews was managing priorities and particularly learning or relearning how to enjoy a life after stroke. So I will start with the first theme and bring more details about each, and look particularly of what were the perspectives of caregivers because of the topic of this webinar. So being optimistic, it was something that was was recognized by some carers as not being a characteristic. They were not optimistic by nature, or could be not optimistic by nature, but they valued this characteristic and this importance as a way of moving forward. And here we can see a quote from a carer who said, "If it was the other way around, I would stay there at home, sad and upset." He has this very good thing. He says that we have to look ahead. He is her husband. Even when he was in the hospital, he made us laugh. I really want to believe that everything will be okay. And this is an example of a carer that, even not being an optimistic person, she realized that it was important in order to manage all the challenges they were facing with this new situation. Also, related with this, some Portuguese participants, both people with stroke and carers, and because in Portugal we have some strong religious and particularly Catholic beliefs, faith was considered very important for some participants in order to help them to cope with this situation. And this was viewed differently over time. Firstly, participants seem to give importance to their religious belief in order to help them to maintain hope in recovering their lives, their previous life. But later on, their faith was also very important, but as something that could help them to accept what happened and to help them to reduce their anger and frustration. Here, I also have some quotes from the same caregiver in the interview 1 and the second interview. And as you can see, in the first interview, she mentioned that it's the life that no one expects, but I have faith that my husband will be able to walk and drive. Faith is the last thing to die. And 6 months later, she was more focused about accepting what life gave them and the importance of accepting to having strength to keep going with the challenges that they had to deal with. Another topic that was important for participants was understanding what happened, and particularly developing knowledge that was relevant to them. And here I have also an example of a carer who said, "I wasn't prepared and it's common. But I understood a few things. I have an encyclopedia. There it explained how to care for the person and talk to her. And this carer was, his wife had aphasia, so it was important to manage her communication difficulties. So his knowledge was important, it was relevant to deal with her communication difficulties. Also, and over time, there were also some changes, and initially the doubts were more related with the causes of stroke, what happens, why this happened to us, and later on, 6 months later, were more related with trying to find what could help them. Another example, I would like to know if hydrotherapy could help relieving her pain, and so these were more practical information, trying to find some solutions that to their daily problems. Looking at the second theme, balancing supports, it was really important for both participants, their mutual supports, feeling that they were not alone, that they were sharing some needs was important to find some emotional stability. And here we also have a quote from a carer that said, he is always saying, I don't want you to get upset. And then he holds me tight, he kisses me all the time. I think that he feels protected and there is someone there who worries about what he's doing. So with this carer, we have an example of the importance of feeling the love from her husband, and this also giving her strength to give the support that he needs in these difficult times. But also there was a situation, and over time, particularly 6 months later, not always these close relationships seem to be perceived as positive and supportive by health professionals or others close to them. So, and also sometimes carers realized that they really needed also some time for themselves, and needing to balance the time to support the person and the time for themselves. As we can see in this quote, said this caregiver saying that we also travel because of me. So after 6 months, there was also the highlights of the caregiver's needs. I'm with her 24 hours a day, and as you can imagine, these 24 hours are not always easy. Traveling is good for me and for her. At João home, and it's his brother's home, he or his wife cooks for us. When we arrive home, I already have my brain fresh and ready to start again. So these quotes gives us an idea of how over time caregivers could also find strategies to take care of themselves, and how this was also important to give a better support to their partner. Another important point was there were some participants that found that they consider it important to have someone else, another person to talk with, as a way of protecting their partner. And usually the person was the health professional, who they considered that it was important to be patient and sensitive to their thoughts, in order to feel confident about sharing their doubts, their struggles and difficulties. Last but not least, the third theme related with managing priorities. And This team came out particularly at the time of the second interview with some participants starting to realize that they had their lives on hold, that they have been in the last 6 months focused on the rehabilitation process, but they needed to move on and to restart making plans and adjusting them to the reality of the new situation, accepting this new situation. And here we also have an example of a carer saying that we would like to have a camper van, and this was a dream before stroke. And then he said, now it's, look, let's travel tomorrow, and we go. We travel a lot. It's good to change for a while. So it's not exactly how they plan to have a camper van, but they found solutions and ways to adapt their dreams and adjust to the new situation. So, concluding and looking at all these experiences shared by both people with stroke and particularly by caregivers, we realize that people may find different several strategies to deal with the challenges after stroke, and there are no right or wrong ways to adjust. People find their own way to do it. Also, we also found that time seemed to be very important. So things doesn't happen suddenly. Stroke happens suddenly, but their adaptation could be slow, and they really need time to adjust to the new roles and to the new reality. Also, not every kind of support is necessarily useful for all, and health professionals may have an important role tailoring their approach and looking particularly and probably individually for the informal caregivers' needs and the people with stroke needs. Thank you very much for your attention. You can find more details in a paper published, and more data will be published also soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, for sharing your research with us today. It was really interesting and a great talk and very, very informative. Thank you. Before I introduce you to our next speaker, we're going to play a short clip from Mrs. Serunova, who talks about the support she has received from stroke support organization Cerebrum. Mrs. Serunova has cared for her son since he had a stroke in 2016. She's a carer who benefits from the support she gets from the stroke support organization Cerebrum in the Czech Republic.
Cerebru jsem moc vděčná za to, že se postará o mého syna, protože v té době, kdy není doma, si můžu já zase chvíli věnovat sobě, tak jako dřív, než se synovi stal úraz a žil sám svým životem, a já jsem o svůj život vlastně tímto přišla. A díky tomu si aspoň na pár dní zase vzpomenu na starý časy, kdy jsem se jenom já věnovala sobě a svým koníčkům. Děkuji moc.
Thank you again. So let me say some few words about us. We have been established in year 2007. We are located in Prague, Czech Republic, and we have three main pillars of activities. One pillar is information support for stroke survivors and families. We also cooperate with specialists from the field of neurology and neurosurgery, and our aim of legislation is the change through the dealing and communication with local politicians. To give you a picture, we have approximately 300 clients a year, and in Czech Republic it's about 30,000 stroke cases in a year. So when it all began, it was actually the reason for funding this NGO, because we wanted to provide information to stroke survivors and caregivers. Also, the non-existence of information hub for stroke survivors and their families in the Czech Republic was the reason why we started the project. and the very easy calculation then why we have only 300 cerebrum clients when here is 30,000 stroke victims. So problem must be in information resources. So we realized that to give information, we have to be more proactive. And also we constantly receive the feedback from cerebrum clients on our information wealth and the resources they received from us. So who pays for it? Project is fully funded by European funds through Ministry of Social Affairs. Project takes 2 years, and we already started it September 2019. Our team is 1 full-time and 8 part-time employees involved into project. We have 3 advisors, 1 peer, 1 psychologist, 1 occupational therapist, and also leisure therapist activity coordinator. So what is the action behind all these? We established 4 advisory offices in a healthcare institution in Prague, where we try to communicate with social worker, therapists, and seldom with doctors. The main aim is to disseminate our contact details to patients who are being discharged, and to their caregivers. But, and this is very important, but it takes about 1 or 2 months for caregiver to really contact us after the realization of feeling lost in the system. So they are not contacting us right away. Advisor's role is to clarify the core issue the caregiver needs to solve, because what happens very often, the final core issue is far, far different from the original request. So we need to be very good listener. Preferred communication is via email. When we spoke with a client, we are clarifying the core issue. We often identified that caregiver is in need of a psychologist support for herself or himself. So we do provide counseling with a psychologist in free of service. And the moment we realize that caregiver is in need of a psychological support, this is a crucial moment of this project. We call it oxygen mask on the plane we are giving to the caregiver. And how we measure the success. So we regularly use the questionnaire of the feedback, where the main question is how respondent was before knowing cerebrum and how he is after knowing cerebrum, after receiving all those information. We proceed to request database to create frequently asked question manual. And also we take every feedback very seriously. Even negative feedback is very important for us, because we try to find what gap in information we have, why we were not able to provide the full information to make caregiver happy. What is the achievement so far? It is our participation in a holistic approach to caregivers in Czech Republic, which has been happening in last 2 years in some healthcare premises. We are building the communication bridge between caregiver and hospital personnel for aftercare treatment after discharge from the hospital, to let caregiver understand better what's going on. So we support caregiver in cooperation with doctor regarding long-term treatment process, to let them know where and how, to understand what's going now and what will happen next, or for example, what social support they are entitled to receive from the state. And we are providing contact for regional rehabilitation services close to patient home to help caregiver to easily find it. Here you can find some practical tips we prefer. So provide caregiver with information, what happens with patient in acute state, what to do next, what to ask to doctor, because we believe that people becomes caregiver already at the time of hospitalization and not until after dischargement. maintain a list of rehabilitation institutes in the country, included condition of a treatment, for example, information and link for aftercare and home care services in individual region of the country, and make the caregiver a priority. Again, our motto, oxygen mask on the plane. And key moment, response to the caregiver as soon as possible. Let them know that queries are very important to us. We pride in being active listeners because half work is done by active listening and being there for the caregiver. And in case here is no solution for the query, let's collect such a query and use them as a base for the system change. And also very practical tips is to build a peer-to-peer program to use a caregiver and their experience to share with others. And what's our future? So we are already seeking funds to continue this project, which will be closed after February 2022. Our ambition is create the online community for caregivers, moderated by us. And we are already participating in the project of Alliance of Individual Support in Czech Republic. This is a project for long-term caregiver with all spectrum of diagnosis, because we believe united we are stronger. The natural step is for the caregiver to contact Cerebrum to realize that he or she is not alone in this dire situation. This is our dream. And also, we want to be a light accompanying the caregiver on the way through the tunnel to reach the light in the end of the tunnel. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jana. What a great, I've really had some technical problems which I don't understand, but thank you, Jana. What a great example of how a program can really make a difference to health and well-being of informal carers. Before we begin the question and answer session, I'd like you to invite everyone to take the second poll this morning. The question is, as a result of this webinar, how would you change what you do around caregiving? You can complete your answers from the poll tab, as you see under my face here in Slido. Please do so. We will give you some time to do this. Now, I'd like to start the question and answer session. So all the speakers are back. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for sending your questions and answers. We could ask the speakers to give us each a little simple take-home message if some questions are too complex. We're looking for Jana. Where is Jana? There she is. Great. Okay. Thank you all for sending your questions to the panel. Please continue sending your questions through until the end of the session. I'd like to invite everybody, all the panelists, and I will go one by one. So let me start with Professor Semenza. Professor Semenza, question that came up. How can specific disorders of awareness due to the effects of brain lesions be? It seems from what you told us that lowered awareness of a deficit can concern just the deficit in some cognitive functions, but not in others. And we know that example in math or music. Isn't this intuitive? Yeah, please.
Just the basic finding you get in neuropsychology derives from the so-called modularity of mind. Part of our brain is functioning completely independently from other parts, and that makes easy for a incongruency between loss of a function and sparing of other function possible. However, this is counterintuitive. People do not generally conceive our brain as such, And they may think that if one person is bad in some function, is bad in everything, more or less. While really it can happen that the people may be very good, extremely good at some function, and yet very bad at functions that are really may be intuitively even easier than the other. You know, I can give you an example again from math. There was a patient who could not make 3 times 7, and yet he could do algebra perfectly.
Wow.
Okay, so
Right.
when you face these things and you're not accustomed, as the older neuropsychologists we are, to see these things, you may get puzzled and you think this can't be. Instead, it can be. Or people who can write but cannot read, and they are not blind. Okay, so that happens.
Yeah. So, and I think what your message is that caregivers have to be aware of these differences and these modality specific difficulties, and it'll make their life much easier. And you made some great messages there, basically saying don't have guilt and do your best. And I think that that's a great take home message. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Professor Semenza. And now a question for Carla. How do informal caregivers, how can they find the balance between having time for themselves and their loved ones? Can you try to answer that? It's hard to balance all the time, but how would you do that? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very important question, and because it's usually what mainly caregivers struggle with. And the first thing is to realize that they need time for themselves, and that will benefit not only themselves but also the person that they are caring, and not having guilt about having that time. And probably for some caregivers that have more difficulties in doing that, health professionals may help, giving some tips and some proposals. For instance, there were some participants in this study that invited caregivers to go out for a walk during the rehabilitation session, and it was a period when the caregiver could find some time for him or herself, knowing that her partner was okay. And doing it once per week or two, and trying to include in their schedule some small periods of time for themselves, for doing what they probably enjoyed before, some hobbies that were lost, and they could restart and plan to include again in their life. So also some other family members can help in this. I think it's not just one person's job. Usually it's a team job, and sharing their struggles and their worries with others. Others can also help in finding a solution. So not feeling alone, not being alone, share their emotions. There are also some participants that mentioned the importance of sharing with other carers, because they could also find some strategies. So I think these are some important tips that users can use
Wonderful.
to find more this balance.
Wonderful, Carla. Thank you. There are strength in numbers, and sharing our problems gives us information. Absolutely. Thank you for that. But before I go to Jana, we've got a whole bunch of questions coming in, and thank you, and keep sending in your questions. Can we also collate the poll afterwards? There are a lot of responses to the poll, so we're going to do it afterwards. Can we can we move on to Jana, and we will talk about some practical things. What is the ideal profile requirement to become an advisor in such a matter when you're dealing with caring for caregivers in stroke survivors and their families?
Thank you for the question. Profile of advisor is not to be very well aware about any specific medical knowledge or social knowledge. What you really have to be is very careful listener and be able to understand what someone is talking about, and be able to find out what may be a problem behind, because caregivers are overwhelmed with all problems, all situation they are facing to this unique situation in their life. So to find out what's behind, it's very important. So willing to help is a key priority to become a counselor in our advisory project.
Yeah, and I don't want to interrupt, but this question keeps coming up from many of the audience members. How is your program funded?
Okay.
Can you tell us about that? Yes.
Program is funded by European funds through the program of, let me be specific, European funds, European Social Employment Program, and it's actually run by local Ministry of Social Health, Social Affairs. Sorry.
Wonderful, wonderful, and I guess that is a funding source for many other stroke survivor organizations throughout Europe that that others may want to contact you and talk to you about, if that's possible. I'm sure.
Yes.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of our session, and I'm sorry about the technical time. We are pleased. We're getting a lot of questions coming in. Thank you so much, and the message in the polls. It's very difficult sometimes to coordinate this online. Hopefully it'll be face-to-face very soon. And thank you all for your excellent questions. I'd like to close this event by thanking everybody involved: speakers, chair, sponsors, Stroke Alliance for Europe, and of course, staff and all the participants. You're going to receive an email over the coming days that will ask you for some feedback, that will help us improve our event in the future. And also to let you know when materials from today's webinar are available, should you wish to see it on demand and share with your colleagues. You can access previous webinars in the series now at the Life After Stroke Forum website, which is www.elasf.org. And I'm delighted to see the issue of life after stroke is receiving the European focus it deserves. And I hope this really will change the practice, and we will see improvement in how stroke support care for stroke survivors continues to flourish within Europe. We will be in touch soon, and we hope to see you at our next event. And thank you, everybody, and goodbye, and have a great day. Bye-bye.